All right, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your lunch here. This was the second Lunch and Learn or second installment that we've done. We had an info session back in September that is on the website if you'd like to see that. So this is a follow-up on some of the questions submitted, some further details that have developed since that time. And we'll be addressing those. So just some things to know. We're recording this session. We're going to share that on the HSE website. If you go to academics under career technical education, there is quite a bit of information there, including the Q&A and some of those things. This is going to be more of a Q&A driven in response. I know we took some time on September 18th to share quite a bit of info, and that was due to some of the questions just needed to clarify some things. So we're going to try to give it more time for Q&A to here today. There are OE representatives in attendance. They're listening in. They have submitted a charter application. So we've shifted their role a little bit now that we're in that process. They're not going to take an active role, but they could field questions at the end if Q&A questions need to be directed their way. Also today, we're joined by staff from the Indiana Charter Innovation Center. And they're going to actually share some further information as objective experts here. So they've got some slides and some information to share with you. I'll intro them when we get to that. Remember, you could submit questions during the presentation. There is a Q&A button at the top where you can submit those. The chat is not the place to do that. That's turned off. And then we're going to work to answer those questions as we go. Any questions that are entered there that we don't get to or aren't addressed, we're going to continue to add those. I'll note that the questions, some of the things we'll share here today, the Q&A has been updated on that website space. So if you miss anything, it's all right there, and continue to drive this conversation. Wanted to start just with some summary of stats from the last call. So we are just kind of the problem we're trying to solve. That was a big question. That's why we took quite a bit of time to frame that in the last call. So we're really looking at transitioning from J. Everett Leiter, the Pursuit Institute, for our CTE programs. If we're going to do that, we need to stand up currently students that are in those programs, 19 of those programs. One of the things we noted that once kids had even expressed interest in some of those programs in the spring, they had dropped that. So 88 students by the fall had decided that due to travel and schedules and things like that, they weren't going to continue to engage in that. And that's really the problem we're trying to solve with CTE programs here in the district is the capacity and to meet those. Specific programs such as cosmetology don't have that capacity to meet student interest. There's wait lists for those. Our in-house CTE programs are at or exceeding that capacity, and so we're going to need to look at scaling facility space for that growth as well as staffing. Currently serving 7% of HSE students, 9 through 12. If you change that to 11 through 12, it's about 13%. We're going to pay roughly $650,000 to those CTE providers this year to provide these programs to students that want them in tuition. And so that's obviously not money coming back into our programs. And then assuming that if we use that figure to kind of calculate, we'd have to, the cost would total around $2.4 million annually for those opportunities if we just kind of stuck with our partners and didn't scale our own programs or capacity. So quick review on some of the problems we're trying to solve. Again, go back and watch the first session for an overview of much greater detail of those things. I just realized I didn't turn on my special light here. It's supposed to make my face look better. Hang on one second. How do I do that, Emily? All right. Much better. Thank you all. Wanted to review our timeline here. Actually, I'm going to clarify some things that was an Indy Star article from yesterday here in a moment about that as well. So really the nexus of engaging the public and kind of going to for some board action back in August was a timeline established by the state to potentially tap into some grant funding. First of all, our timeline has already shifted, and so I'll go over some of those changes here. But we submitted an authorizer application. So to become a charter authorizer, HSE Schools took board action back in August to move forward, and that authorization was approved at the State Board of Education meeting on 9/11. So we did earn that status. that all that did was meeting that deadline by submitting that prior to September 1st meant that we could potentially tap into the CSP grant at any time during this school year. We wanted that. The initial thinking was that we could potentially scale some of these CTE programs for next school year to basically give kids opportunities that they weren't getting elsewhere. But we've since shifted that. We've slowed down. That's been because of your public input. So thank you for that. But that was really the catalyst for that. One of the things that was stated in that STAR article I'll go to, it said the school board approved over the summer for the district to apply for a $2 million charter school planning grant that would have required the school's opening within 13 months of receiving it. That is the 25-26 school year. I want to be clear, the school board approved us to be an authorizer. We cannot go tap into those grant dollars unless we've entered to a charter agreement with a charter operator, and we have not done that yet. Therefore, we have not applied for any grant. And as we've looked into that, the 13 months was a quick turnaround. Now with a 26-27 opening, if we were to move forward with a charter operator and get this established, that's when we would talk about potentially going and asking for that grant. So a couple of things I wanted to clarify there. We're not talking about a 25-26 opening any longer. We're talking about a 26-27 opening, and we have not applied for that grant. So just to review here, the charter operator would submit an application, which OE did that on Friday, September 27th. And that's really the two things that have happened so far. I'm going to have our guest on the call go into some detail about a typical application process so that you can weigh into that process. But this goes over originally what a possible timeline was that was shared with the board. So we have an application. We're going to start to review that potentially and then move forward with the decision. And then you see those next steps. If HSE and the charter operator enter an agreement, that also means that we have accepted their application. One other note on here, I'm going to move this so I can see, is also that in terms of community input and things on this partnership is that we would also create an innovation network school agreement in this process. So I really wanted to highlight how the community has more voice in this should the process move forward. And then you see that final step where the charter operator would have submit for that CSP planning and implementation grant from the IDOE. I'll talk about that grant a little bit more. So timeline has shifted. It's also fluid. We're dependent on property procurement, a lot of variables here very early in the process. I acknowledged in the first call, it seemed rushed, seemed things like that. That was just because we wanted the possibility of some potential $2 million worth of funding to just explore this. And we've since slowed that part of the process down. So I want to take this opportunity to turn it over to Kim Rear and Scott Best with the Indiana Charter Innovation Center. They are doing this kind of work around the state and just really wanted to ask them for some expertise to tell our community what a kind of typical charter application process looks like, as well as from their purview, what these agreements or these contracts and relationships looks like. So I'm going to introduce Kim Rear here to just share some information.
Yeah, and I'll actually go ahead and let Scott start us off. So Scott Best, take it away.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to talk with you. And again, good to be part of this meeting. And kudos to HSE for being transparent and really kind of putting this thing out there and talking through the process with you. So yeah, I'm Scott Best. I'm the president of the Indiana Charter Innovation Center. We're basically a charter association that supports charter schools around the state of Indiana. And are deeply involved in charter schools nationally, just in terms of policy and support. Our role is to support potential operators as they come into the state and get started. We're really pleased that in this case we have a school district that is looking to partner with a charter school. We see that as a best practice. It would be we already have one of those in Evansville with a highly regarded charter school and a partnership with the district. We think this is an excellent opportunity. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who's our Chief Strategy Officer, to really kind of talk through the application process. And just for some context, Kim has worked both in charter schools, and she's also worked within a Department of Education and with an authorizer. So she's really familiar with what happens typically across the state with all of our various authorizers, and she'll walk through those steps. Kim?
Great. Thanks, Scott. So just to talk you through what the typical charter application process is, and this is really related on best practice that we see across the nation, and this is also what the charter authorizers follow here in Indiana. So a charter authorizer will invite applications from prospective operators, and sometimes that is done on kind of a rolling basis. Sometimes they have charter application windows. It's really up to the authorizer. We've seen authorizers change their practices over time, but really it all starts with an initial application. From that initial application, the authorizer will review and say, does this meet all the state requirements? Does this have a strong plan in terms of the academic plan, the operational plan, the governance plan, financial sustainability? And so based on that initial review, an authorizer typically provides feedback to the operator, just as an opportunity to say, hey, we had some questions about this, or this, that, or the other. And it gives them an opportunity to go back, provide further clarification and detail of their application. From there, they submit a final application. Based on the operator can decide to take the feedback from the authorizer or not, but that final application is submitted, and then the authorizer has a final review of that. There's also a public hearing. This is an opportunity for the operator to make a presentation to the public to talk through what their charter application plan is, what the proposed school model looks like, and typically just provide more general information to the community. At that time, during a public hearing, community feedback and open comment is heard. Based on the final application, the review from the authorizer, any input provided during that public hearing, the authorizer, the review committee from that authorizer puts together a recommendation to approve or deny that charter application based on the application's strengths. That recommendation is provided to the authorizer's board. So in this case, it would be the Hamilton Southeastern School Board. And then that board makes the final decision. And that final decision is yes, that we approve that charter application, or we're going to decline that charter application. So yes, there is a school. No, there is not a school. On the next slide here, we kind of separate the charter application process from the innovation agreement because they're two very distinct processes. You don't have to have an innovation agreement if you have a charter school, but you can based on Indiana state law. So basically, if following that charter application process, if a school application is denied, it stops there. If it's approved, a charter school and their operator may, but is not required to enter into an innovation agreement with the school district. And that process, the innovation agreement process, is really, we're going to apply, negotiate terms between the operator and the school district. And then once everyone reaches agreed terms and there's a signed agreement. Just to point out, it doesn't have to be a charter school that enters into an innovation agreement. We see where there are independent autonomous schools that operate within a district that can be done with another nonprofit organization. And that is for converting an existing district school, restarting an existing district school, or to start a new school. We just want to give that as a piece of information for you, but kind of focusing more strictly on here today on the charter application process. So again, charter, if a charter is approved, may enter into an innovation agreement with the local school district. That innovation agreement allows a few things from each party. So for the school district can count the innovation school's academic performance and enrollment as its own. So when you look at the total enrollment of the district, that would include any of the schools that the district operates, as well as any of the schools that it's entered into an agreement with. From the innovation school's perspective, so potentially a charter school or another school, they gain access to goods and services provided by the district. So that's really where we see kind of that mutual benefit between of the innovation agreement process. The next slide, we really just wanted to try to paint a clearer picture of the roles and responsibilities of who all kind of has input into the charter school. So first of all, the authorizer that we see in the middle here, the authorizer reviews the charter application, is really responsible for monitoring once a school is approved, the academic and financial performance of a school to really ensure compliance and performance, to make sure that that school is meeting all of the obligations within its within state law and within the charter agreement that it has. The authorizer's board is the one that governs the activities of the authorizer and gives that final approval or denial of the charter application. The operator, on the other hand, is the one that's responsible for the charter's overall vision, the budget, all the policies of the school. They really manage the day-to-day operations of that charter school. So that really just kind of wraps up what we wanted to share with you all between the charter application process that we see across the state, as well as innovation agreements and just overall roles and responsibilities.
Thank you for that. Scott and Kim, while you're on the call here, we did have a question come in just quickly on any other, you mentioned Evansville, other districts that your organization supports or works with. Is there any of those currently to mention?
Yeah, right now, Evansville Vanderburg School Corporation is the authorizer for the very, very highly regarded Signature School in Evansville, which is routinely ranked as one of U.S. News and World Report's top, not just charter schools, but top schools in the country. And that was an agreement that exists between that and the district. There were a couple of other ones. Lafayette had done one early on, and then both decided that that didn't work. And so right now, Evansville is the only one that's a district that is the authorizer for a charter school. And just to be clear, we have multiple authorizers in the state of Indiana. So the Indianapolis Mayor's Office, for any school that's located in Indianapolis, the mayor can authorize those, and they've done that dozens of times. The Indiana State Charter Board is a statewide authorizer with a large portfolio. Ball State University is a large authorizer. Trine University in Angola is also a pretty large authorizer. Then there are a few other small, because any four-year university in the state can authorize schools, and there are a few one-offs. Calumet College up in Northwest Indiana has one. There are a couple of others that are one-offs. University of Southern Indiana, and then any school district in the state of Indiana can also authorize. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. But right now, Evansville Vanderburg is the only district right now that's authorizing a school.
I'll take this moment too. There's a question about other applications or entities or organizations. So the authorized or letter that was approved by the state board stipulated a rolling application process, which means that any potential operator could apply and address the what's stipulated in our authorizer letter, which is on the website if you wanted to look at that. So yes, any charter operator could apply, and we would review those through our processes that, as Kim kind of started to, we're still defining a little bit of what that process looks like. Wanted to put that out there and make that transparent, and just to kind of give you an idea of what the next steps might be. So one other thing, just as a reference to what Kim shared as well, if you remember from the first call, we entered into as a charter authorizer because the Innovation Network School is the concept or the vision of what we're designing. Remember, that is because we want to have more accountability, and we felt like as a district to that school, as well as having more autonomy as a community to define what that Innovation Network School, what it really serves and meets with our community. The reason where that and their charter intersects that is because to unlock that $2 million, we'd enter into a charter agreement in order to get that seed funding that wouldn't come out of our district budget. So just review that again. That's more detailed in the first call, but just wanted to connect that dot. So there's some questions that, we said were to be answered in the future here. A lot of these now, I just wanted to come back to some of these things. They're in the charter application that we received. So those will be shared soon as we go through that process, including, facilities, curriculum, budget, staffing, some of the things that Kim actually referenced that are within there. I'll talk a little bit about extracurriculars today and diplomas, but these other elements, just wanted to surface that these are still things to be determined as we're going through this input process and doing that. So I'm going to launch into, I'm going to adjust this slide a little bit. Direct questions that have come in. So how could this impact in HSE funding was a very large question. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper dive into that. So under the Innovation Network School funding, all state funding comes to the school's district first. So that would come to HSE schools. We would then allocate that portion of funding based on the number of students that the Innovation Network School would serve. And then we're able to, again, under the Innovation Network School law, charge that Innovation Network School administrative fee for some oversight and things, as well as offer additional services. One of the misconceptions that's floating around out there is that we would have to provide these things free to the school. We can define what that looks like, whether we're offering those in kind or that we would actually charge them for the cost of those services. Again, we're going to define that. If we did that, that's set up as a contract between the Innovation Network School and the district to provide some of those things. And then the Innovation Network School is responsible for managing its budget to cover these costs while meeting its goals and those sort of things. So it operates with that. I'll talk about some of that oversight in a minute. Let's get into kind of some numbers here. So the explanation. So here's our pure pupil funding. Again, we're the fifth lowest in the state when it comes to that. So if the charter school was to enroll 500 students, that gives you a total there of about $3.4 million. And then we could turn around and contract with that Innovation Network School for some services and some things. The charter school planning grant funding up to $2 million could fund the planning and the program, the design, purchasing materials, equipment, hiring staff, developing those sort of things. Again, that's for the planning and implementation, should we get to that point. But wanted to point out the funding cannot be used for construction, major renovation projects, or things for that. Remember, we're trying to solve a problem here for facilities, capacity, and things for some of these programs. One of the questions out there is about our referendum and what that means. So per the referendum law, it really stipulates how charters can opt into a referendum process to seek funding from the community. And currently that law applies only to the corporations in Lake, Marion, St. Joseph, and Vanderburgh counties, right? So at this moment, should we go through with another referendum, I think that this would be entertained with that, but it does not stipulate that we are giving referendum dollars to the Innovation Network School, that sort of thing. Talking about specifically the funding around CTE programs. So there's questions about Perkins and state CTE funding. So federal dollars, the figure there for this current school year is $114,000. That money can only be used for equipment, supplies, materials, PD, and contractual services for those programs. So it's really support money for those CTE programs. You'll see the state has money through the Next Level programs of study of about $2.2 million. That goes towards, currently HSE has 82 CTE courses. So those aren't just the CTE programs. Gives you an idea, it's funded by credit. So kids actually in some of those programs are earning multiple credits within those courses likely with that. And because a CTE coursework, for example, is kind of 3 classes. So there'd be 3 credits that funding comes into. Many of those courses are also dual credit. And then those funds are focused on staffing and those program costs, again, from the state. So the distinction here is that this is not typically money that goes towards the building of programs with that. Wanted to point out that in last school year, we paid our third-party providers. So again, this is J. Everett Light, ABC Prep Academy, and the Pursuit Institute a little over $550,000. And so if you subtract that from last year's funding, we're at about $1.7 million in funding that again comes in to support staffing of CTE teachers. Usually those teachers earn a higher wage based on their experience when they come into our system with that, as well as just the program cost of some of those programs. Wanted to put a point of reference in here as we've evaluated kind of 2 properties and gotten to the point of what would it cost to, for example, have a cosmetology program built out. Just the cost for the facilities and equipment just for that program was somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million. So pointing out there that tuition piece from the state, let's say we didn't put that towards staffing and the actual supplies of those programs, which they need, and that's what it's for. But to give you an idea, we'd maybe be building a program a year to try to get to those 19 based on current funding. So how does HSE's role as a charter authorizer impact our community? So again, being an authorizer with the vision of an innovation network school, we get to shape the educational landscape of our community, ensure that those meet the high standards of our school system, both in academic performance and providing these innovative opportunities, and then to provide more educational choices to complement what we currently offer. So we want to ultimately benefit students and parents, offering diverse learning environments with things like that. It also ensures that charter schools are held accountable for their performance and that they contribute positively to our community as a whole. Again, that first call you heard directly from Opportunity Education about how they've done that in other communities and intend to do that if we did move forward. What options are being explored to evaluate these and scale career exploration experiences for our students? So yes, Opportunity Education partnerships, just one possible component to provide these experiences. HSE High School is going to undergo a renovation soon, start planning here around the holidays is when that will really kick off. And that could establish some of these programs on our campus. However, we know that space isn't large enough to build out all of the programs our kids are interested in. Also, HSE Schools owns 3 properties. That's been a big question. We're also evaluating those, including potentially how those could be utilized if the OE partnership move forward in terms of that way. We're exploring all those options and really didn't want to set the tone that we're only exploring one option here by moving to the board action and those sort of things. We're gonna slow this down, and we're going to ensure that all options are explored. Community has the information they need in the board to make a decision about what is best for the long-term sustainability and building out of these opportunities for our students. How will HSE teachers be engaged? So their voice and input obviously is essential. Should that partnership move forward, OE and HSE are going to engage teachers in every step and implementation of the way there. Obviously, that's a big need that we have. Our grant opportunities recurring. So just specifically talking about the charter school program grant, that's a one-time grant to support, again, that planning and implementation of that. But we also believe there would be other state, federal, private grants that could be utilized kind of in this partnership in the future to support programming and things like that. Who approves this partnership? Kim referenced this, but it's our school board of trustees would approve whether or not a charter operator based on their application would be able to move forward with the creation of a school. Career technical education programs will be offered. I know initially in my board presentation about this, I created some examples of what could be those programs, but those were purely examples. We're going to do a deep dive again. Coming out of the For Next Generation work, we use what is student interest and what is workforce demand to create those programs. So we're going to be able to share that data with the community, where these programs are coming from in terms of student interest, as well as what career opportunities that could create for our students in the community, or help kids to make better decisions about what they study in college to then come back and serve in those career fields in our community. How sports and extracurriculars work. So students enrolled in traditional charter schools aren't able to participate in their high school's athletics extracurriculars, but students enrolled in Innovation Network School can. So we know that the IHSA has historically allowed this practice, and that students enrolled in that could be granted access to athletics and extracurriculars at their home high school. Additionally, if students at HSE or Fishers that would have access to any extracurriculars that were created in the Innovation Network School. Can students attending the Innovation Network School change their path there, and then how we ensure students' learning aligns with the rigorous expectations of our high schools? So yes, absolutely. Curriculum taught at the Innovation Network School must comply with the Indiana Department of Education standards. Any additional metrics that we define as a district, which we can do, would also be stipulated. It should be just like a student moving from a different high school outside of our district to then step into our high schools in terms of how credits would transfer and those sort of things. So yes, absolutely, that's an option, and we would ensure through the design of everything that the rigor level would correlate to our current high schools. In terms of who oversees the curriculum, so HSE, school board, and schools would ensure that it meets those state and district standards. How they do that, though, is the charter operator would work with their teachers, building the curriculum instruction to meet those learning targets. So again, the charter operator has some autonomy in how they meet those standards in terms of those curriculum experiences and design. Explaining the governance structure, I think we talked about this just a little bit, but what is that? What is how's the school board involved, as well as how's the board oversees the Innovation Network schools? How do the two boards work? So the HSE school boards of trustees would be the authorizer. HSE schools authorizing a charter with an operator by state law. An appointed board oversees that partnership. So that would be created. We've talked about that being a locally appointed board. More simply, HSE School Board of Trustees sets the vision for the Innovation Network School, establishes those key outcomes and key performance indicators, which they then contract with the charter operator to execute. And so that's kind of the relationship between there. The appointed board then works to oversee and support the charter operator in executing the roles and duties outlined in that charter application. So the appointed board of the charter school would support, chime in, take action to ensure that what the HSE school board stipulates the school should do is executed appropriately and within the law and the metrics of charter schools. OE, again, is committed to those appointed board members being local community stakeholders, and we've talked about how the superintendent could also likely have a board seat. And to note again, these aren't paid positions on that board. Just to kind of bring a visual back in from the first presentation, but here's the possible governance structure. So again, we're HSE Schools operating as the authorizer and approver. Opportunity Ed would be the Innovation Network School Management Organization, and then that board of local appointees would oversee that relationship and chime into that. How will this impact current CTE programs? Courses taught in the high schools, will current CTE teachers be moved, that sort of thing. And I've met with many of these teachers at both buildings just to clarify some of this. We're committed to sustaining our current CTE programs. We're employing those instructors as HSE employees. A partnership with the charter operator could allow HSE to offer other programs not currently offered by HSE schools. And that's really what we're pursuing. But in terms of those programs, we want those to be offered to our students. We want to have those teachers be our employees. We've talked about some of the challenges other partnerships have presented to that, and we've found that that's the best way to guarantee the best opportunities for our students. Diplomas will students earn? So we're still determining this, but there is an option that they could be awarded the student's home high school diploma. So we would be talking about that in further conversation should the partnership move forward. Declining enrollment already impacting schools. Why would HSE create a partnership that would decrease enrollment further and therefore funding? So if we provide, the reality is we could provide a different type of experience through an Innovation Network school for students, even students that have left HSE schools. So we could, in fact, bring students back for that type of an opportunity and use this as a space to really try to take on that challenge and to address that. Yearly financial commitment to the district to this partnership. This was also in Kim's slides, but in terms of costs, we know those would be minimal. Right now, those known costs would just be the administrative cost of overseeing the partnership and the collaboration with the charter operator. So a lot of really administrative central office work at this point would be the only financial commitment. What will be the administration staffing? So we're going to determine that. That's in the proposal that we're still working through, but it would definitely have a principal and the necessary teacher staffing to ensure that students are provided adequate high school coursework to reach graduation, right? So as the diploma shifts at the state and things like that, staffing would need to ensure that students at each grade level would be given those opportunities to ensure, obviously, they reach graduation. How could that impact performance, HSE's performance network, or sorry, metrics? So again, Kim noted this, but the performance of that school is included in our district performance metrics. There was a question of why wasn't an RFP utilized? That authorizer letter serves as an RFP. So it outlines everything that is required, both from a legal state perspective as well as HSE stipulations. So I'd guide you to look at that and really see what our request is to meet those needs that we've identified. A question about the CCAs. So you may be aware that both high schools added on CCAs. Were finished around 2015, 2016. So in design, those CCAs did provide 21st century learning and workplace environments, but they did not include the CTE type programs that required specifically designed facilities and equipment by state law. So for example, cosmetology has state law that guides what that facility needs to actually be built out and serve with that. Same with culinary. Each of the programs have stipulations. And so as we design those CCAs, those things weren't built into that space, taken into consideration, and some things like that. Will the Innovation Network School use a created curriculum or OE created curriculum and instructional tools? So possibly. So partnering with OE would allow teachers to use the curriculum resources, instructional tools created by OE. I can tell you in their application, it's hundreds of pages of those offerings that are possible to be utilized there. Obviously, just as a district in general and what we envision, we want teachers to have autonomy to choose the best instructional tools with targets on a guaranteed and viable curriculum to meet the needs of their students in their classroom. So really ensuring they have the resources and an array of instructional options to meet the needs of students is really the vision of all instruction throughout HSE schools. Wanted to address some misconceptions or misunderstandings that were implied or stated in the question. So one is that HSE schools is going to force students into charter school to benefit Opportunity Ed, boost its profits. So absolutely not. You know, attending this would be entirely the choice of students and parents. We would share this opportunity with parents and students, just like any course or academic opportunity offered, but we will not force students into experiences, especially for things like profits and things. So we, the HSE schools community, are pressuring students to join the adult workforce instead of exploring options, providing educational foundation for whatever path students select. We're providing free labor to partners, encouraging students to select the pathway too early. Again, parents and students have full autonomy to choose what's best for them as they navigate their educational journey. The work of our community did with For Next Generation Learning to transform the student experience really commands us to provide the career exploration and foundational learning for students to step into a college, career, or military upon graduation. So while every student, high school student, not just the Innovation Network School students, they're going to pick a career lens to look through. It doesn't mean that they have to choose between college, career, military early in their high school career and experience. And wanted to point out, you know, we have current internship experiences for our students, and we ensure as a district that isn't free labor. Students voice into what they want out of that experience. The partner employer agrees that they're going to provide that. And we really want to ensure that the student gets both learning outcomes and the experience they want within that. Some internships are also paid positions in that. So just really wanted to address that. The idea that career technical education is not as rigorous as academic courses, providing these opportunities will not maintain our high academic standards. So all our current CTE offerings in HSE schools, many provided by our external partners, are dual credit courses taught by teachers that are also accredited by either Ivy Tech or Vincennes University. So these are students that are pursuing industry certifications, credentials, and they're also college students. They're earning college credits there. Our authorizer letter stipulates that this level of rigor must be maintained with any anything that we might build in that way. So the goal, especially as we develop these networks, is that kids have options of both college and career. They may decide which one of those comes first in their journey, but we want to ensure that while they're in our system, they have dual credit courses as well as certification courses, and obviously courses where they're applying and using and immersing themselves in that career before they leave our system. They have less support, and honestly, they're paying for whatever that next step is in their journey. Big money grab for Opportunity Ed. Specifically, it's billionaire founder to get richer and some things. It's just ridiculous claim, but it's in there. So the charter authorizer, we get to establish the vision, performance outcomes, and the operator then submits that plan articulating how those will be met. Community's already articulated this vision with the details within the For Next Generation Learning Transformation. This is a not-for-profit partnership, and our community voice will continue to define the vision and the ideals of what this looks like. Also, this conception that local politicians, district administrators, school board members are going to receive benefits, including kickbacks, establishing this partnership. Charter schools, Innovation Network schools have to report their finances. As an authorizer, HSE schools and our school board will have full access to monitor financial status of the school. And this partnership will have full transparency for our community should it move forward. Claim that charter schools have zero oversight. They don't have to provide transportation. HSC will have to fund those things if we want students to have those. It's just false claim. It's actually illegal. And that's not going to be part of the vision for this at all. We're going to pay HSC schools for these students. There's no type of revenue exchange for students through this partnership. And the main purpose of this endeavor is to insist that property, land be purchased and financially benefit property owners in the community, and then kickbacks somehow associated with that. So all that's going to be fully transparent. Property acquisition, finances will be inspected by the public, by our school board, all those sort of things. The idea that charter schools can exclude, don't have to serve, provide these opportunities to exceptional learners. I've seen this also about gifted students has recently come through as a claim. So false claim, charter schools and innovation networks must have open enrollment. They can't discriminate. They can serve special populations of students, but we as a district and an authorizer would have full say in what that kind of looks like in terms of the student experience there as we charter that vision together. Partnership will not be managed, evaluated, or staffed by HSE employees. HSE schools will have extensive oversight, accountability with that. Our administrative staff, at the direction of our school board, would execute the duties and related to that oversight and accountability. That's all spelled out. Also, the claim that our community will have zero input regarding how the school will run, the vision, direction will take. Again, another false claim that's out there and wanted to address. The claim the charter school cannot unionize. Well, it's true that charters don't. Under the Innovation Network school, those teachers can unionize, but it wouldn't operate under our HSEA by law with that. HSE schools will have to pay for transportation, food service. I think I already addressed this, but again, we could contract those services, but it doesn't mean we have to pay for those for this. If HSE schools doesn't authorize Opportunity Ed to operate the school's local politicians will authorize it at this time. No local politicians are authorizers. And the question, why can't they just donate the money and do this without establishing the school? And, it doesn't really align with the vision mission of OE as we explore that partnership, nor would that be sustainable to provide this opportunity long-term to students within currently kind of how we're envisioning that partnership. Okay, so just quick overview there of the questions that we've seen. I've got questions rolling in here. Sort these aside. Question about the signature school in Evansville. Who is the network that runs it? So the district, it was similar to a partnership as the, I'm not going to say the Vanderburg, is it Vanderburg something? Scott, help me.
Evansville Vanderburg. And just to be clear, the signature school has its own board. It's an appointed board, just like you would be considering here. And so they're run independent of the school corporation, but because the school corporation is the authorizer, they have ultimate oversight over that school. And also just a note, all charter schools in the state, and this is actually more rigorous than the oversight for district schools, all authorizers or all charter schools in the state have to undergo a yearly independent third-party audit that then gets submitted to the State Board of Accounts, whereas district schools undergo a State Board of Accounts audit every 2 years, and the independent audit is much more rigorous. So if people have questions around finances, how are they going to know? That's an independent third-party audit that's done every single year, and it goes into a great deal of detail.
Scott, while we talk about that oversight and accountability, can you just kind of speak broadly to, I know that as an authorizer, we could require, status reports and data to support what's happening kind of on our terms. What's something you see typically as an authorizer asking for checkpoints, if you will?
Yeah, and I'll do two separate things here. One, as the authorizer, you can have an accountability framework where you say, look, every year the charter's operator must submit to us. And again, it would be their audit, it would be their academic records. You could choose to have, I know the mayor's office in Indianapolis has quarterly meetings with all of their portfolio schools on academics, governments, and finance, right? So every month they're meeting with them on a different subject. As an authorizer, you have the ability to say how often you're going to do that kind of review, where you would sit down with, the principal or the board of the school and really dive into how they're doing. So that's as an authorizer. If you wind up doing an innovation agreement, you can also require that school to come and report to you, twice a year, do a report to the school board and the public. I know that Indianapolis Public Schools does that with with their innovation partners, and in South Bend Community Schools is doing the same thing with the school that they partner with as an innovation school up there.
So the district, to summarize, would set the terms of maybe quarterly or however often we wanted to check in on the status of those performance metrics, as well as just have a recurring regimental presentation to our community and the board for input, comment, and guidance.
Yes.
Thank you. What CT program has the greatest, greatest need from students? That's something I can add to that Q&A. I want to make sure I'm accurate in that. It depends, kind of the context of that, but I can share the data on kind of the enrollment in our CTE programs in general. I think there was a chart in the first presentation. If not, I'll get it up there on the website for sure in the FAQ. Beyond revoking the charter, what tools will the district have to ensure the charter school is meeting HSE's high standards? Scott, are you up for that question?
Yeah, and Kim, feel free to chime in as a former authorizer. So yeah, there's a number of steps they can take. So they can essentially put the school on double secret probation, right? I mean, they can say, look, your academic standards are not hitting our framework, and so we're going to give you 18 months or 12 months or 36 months to correct those things. And we're going to now check in with you more frequently because we want to see any progress that you're making towards that, right? So they have a number of tools at their disposal as the authorizer, because really the authorizer is in charge of the contract. And so as school, look, here's, our quarterly finance meeting, our days of cash on hand are not where it needs to be. And so then the authorizer can say, you need to develop a plan to make sure that you've got that. And they can do that in all three areas of governments, finance, and academics.
Great. Thank you for that. Is there a program for elementary students too? Not at this time. This is a focus on 9 through 12. With that, we haven't had any conversations around that. But, there's, who knows, opportunities in the future of what that might look like. There was a question about focusing on providing learning opportunities that would help students be a viable option for employment with groups. The example they use here is like Andretti Racing, which is moving to Fishers. Yes, that's a big part. It's actually within some of the forward work. If you looked at even the examples that I just put out as examples, I think the energy around careers potentially, Andretti Racing, so racing in general, and motorsports. And one of the things I think is exciting about Fishers is we've had those conversations in the Ford Next Generation work. We're talking about maybe a kid has an interest in racing, but to be able to engage with HR and finance, all of the facets of a company that's still centered around a purpose or an interest of a student with that. Things that came out of that conversation, we've obviously had some biopharma companies recently locate here and are growing very fast in the workforce partnership. We're talking with engineering and advanced manufacturing as part of that. The other big one that's an example I've used, again, this is just an example, but the sports entertainment and events management of things like our new event center, as well as the G League facility, all the way to places like Grand Park or some things. Obviously, these are sectors in development and economic development in the city of Fishers. And I love that question because the idea would be just to kind of pivot a little bit from a traditional CTE concept. There are CTE course pathways that would lead to that. So I'll use an example. Event management or facilities management. It's actually a construction trades pathway, but that's a huge need for facilities. I've actually even had the conversation with the company managing the new event center. That's an industry that's growing, that our students could get those certifications and then step into a facility around the nation in terms of things like that. So, but there's also the opportunity too that a kid goes on to college, they've had that connection with a local employer or something like that, but their first step to that is a 4-year degree that opens the door into that industry. So really want to stress that what we've talked about with OE and kind of explored this, what we would build as this facility would be programming that could be reprogrammed every 5-10 years based on workforce needs, so that we ensure both student interest is being met in those fields, but as well as there are employment opportunities right here in our community as kids explore those sort of things. So it's a good question. You have any other questions over there, Emily? One more. I got one more question coming. Okay. Yeah, there's a question here about OE's direct work within CTE spaces and finding licensed accredited educators and things like that. OE's experience is in kind of the private schools. They're moving into charter schools with that. I think this goes back to the structure that's a little bit different. And ultimately, when they asked what problem is Fishers trying to solve, it was creating some of these CTE opportunities for our students. And the way that they proposed they could do that was through a 9 through 12 charter that really changes the experience that 500 kids would have, and then 500 plus kids we could build out some of those CTE programs with facilities and equipment with that. So to directly answer, this is new space for them to move in, but OE essentially in that conversation said, we want to help you with the problems you're trying to solve here. And this was the one that we presented to them, and they felt like potentially, so it's mutual beneficial between both parties, we could do that. So in terms of building those, the CTE programs are coming a lot out of the Ford Next Generation work that the community's done. We would continue to monitor that just to kind of bring that up to people who weren't involved in that work. We heavily analyze Lightcast and career data for our local community of what is growing here and where the either jobs are growing or where people earn higher than average salaries in those professions. And obviously that's where we'd like to help kids explore and to do that. And so this would provide opportunities for us to immerse those students in high school into doing those careers through those CTE kind of experiences and pathways, again, to determine, am I going into the workforce with these credentials and certifications I've earned, or I've also explored that career authentically in high school, but I know now what I'm going to major in college, with a greater intentionality or a greater purpose with that. So, transparently, the partner, we're exploring this together, and really, I summarized the call last week around really what a couple things that we're asking of the community and want input on is ultimately how do we best build these opportunities for our students in the long term? And is this option of a charter establishment with some seed money and some what I call venture capital into those programs really the best way to go about doing that? And then ultimately, is OE a viable partner in doing that? And we're going to continue to kind of have that conversation. So Emily has now handed me her computer to look at the questions. I don't see any more. Let me see. Yep, in here. So this one. Oh, new post. Okay. Questions around budget and greater details of expenditures and those sort of things. Those will be coming as we review the application and look at what's been proposed to that relative to then also what we're doing with that. I think some of you might have also seen recent budget presentations here from the district, and we're still in the process of working here with the central office team to both look at all those options of how we build out these programs, as well as the financial impact, what long-term, short-term solutions are available. And again, we want community input into that. Obviously, our board would need to weigh in and take action on any of those types of proposals. So again, further details coming based on applications and proposals and things from that. So, okay. Just a reminder, continue to submit. We continue to monitor the questions part on our website of any questions or concerns or things that you have with that. Really appreciate you taking the time here today. This will be uploaded here shortly, ideally today, if not early tomorrow, so you can see this presentation or guide people towards it. And we will continue to refine. We plan to have a timeline further established here very quickly, and that will be posted to that space, as well as any resources or things to better inform the community and the school board moving forward. So thank you again so much for your time and your engagement with this, and we look forward to further conversations. Have a great rest of your day.